Hello everybody, I'm here the Japanese Train, aka Matt.
And I'm Master of the Lemons, aka Lemmy.
And today we have a brilliant episode of Character Gallery for you. It's the heavily engineered coal truck on rails. Or Hector.
Yeah, I always love that he had that name. Somebody probably just had a field day figuring out what each letter would stand for.
I think Hector is a really fascinating character because he is like the Frankenstein among the trucks, but he's also...
Yeah, that's a good description.
It's very clear that he's massive. It's very clear that he stands out. Like, to me, it doesn't seem like he's a character that would have siblings, you know?
Yeah, he feels to me like this big government project that is like a really, he's literally got like a code name. He's got, like you led with, he's got this 6-letter code name that just sounds really like advanced and badass, like that they've slowly refined, and they built him one year and then slowly took pieces off and rebuilt him over and over again until they had the ultimate hopper. Like, that's what Hector seems like to me. Like,
yeah. The closest is, like, I guess the hopper wagon that the wiki gives him a basis of, which is, again,
here's the thing, Hector's a hopper. Like, he's an enormous coal hopper. It feels weird to me to not have him come from America.
He looks like he comes from, like, the B&O. He looks like a Burlington Northern CSX mega project.
Yeah, but the problem also stands that if you take any hopper, really, from any American railway and put it in Britain, all of a sudden it is enormous, because everything in Britain is smaller. And so, I want to figure out how to mingle those two ideas. Like, I want Hector to be the biggest truck in the world, but also be...
Right, which is troubling. Well, the thing is that
yeah,
he's not going to exceed the size of, like, most American, like, refrigerated cars or those auto racks.
Yeah, no, he's not going to be the biggest in the world unless he was built in America. So he's probably, I guess it's a matter of picking and choosing. Either he's just a straight up American hopper that was brought over to Britain, which would make him, the biggest hopper in Britain, or he's like a British built project.
There's something about him that looks very prototypical because,
yeah,
like, he doesn't have those guardrails in the front and back.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's very bare bones because he's still kind of in his trial stages. Because Hector has not been filled up with coal once by the time of the episode. Like,
he's literally. I think when Bill and Ben take him in, he's being delivered from wherever he was built.
It's weird that Bill and Ben deliver him. Like,
well, we mentioned this, I think, in the Bill and Ben episode, that if Ben were just not there, or if Ben were in the front, Hector would not be bashing them around.
Yeah, that's the thing. He couldn't, because he's a single free-rolling truck, right? So for the momentum to actually bump him back and forth like it's doing, there need to be two engines in the mix.
If anything, I think that would take an already intimidated and defensive character like Hector in the moment, make him a lot more upset.
Yeah, really. And that's the thing, too. Trucks are troublesome because they're the worst engineered parts of the railway. They are just cobbled together wooden structures that are just used to transport things quickly.
Trucks are no one's friends.
Yes. They're poorly engineered, right?
Right.
What is Hector? He's heavily engineered.
Ooh.
So that makes sense as to why he is a nice truck, why he acts so differently. It's because he doesn't have all of those. He's not all rotten and rusty, and like, say, the reason like Scruffy is the worst truck of all. He's got rotten wood, rusty frames. He is the worst performing truck in terms of how he acts interpersonally between the other characters, and in terms of how he behaves as a piece of railway equipment. There's that whole metaphor going on, and so with Hector, makes a lot of sense that he acts the way that he does, because it reflects his design and how he was conceived. Now, I think what wins me over, I have to go with the version where he's this big government project by British Railways to build to build the ultimate coal truck for Britain.
Yeah.
You know, as much as I like the idea of Hector being American, I have to say that it wins me over, the idea of him being this just enormous, you know, just having a code name does it for me. It's like, this is clearly something that, there's something very special about this truck. There's nothing like
the
that.
Hector Project.
Yeah, really, that's what they would call it, which sounds actually pretty cool. So let's talk about how would this really affect his psyche, and maybe...
So, immediately I think of the contrast he has to the trucks. And I think of the fact that I think that Hector would actually ruffle a lot of feathers within the troublesome truck hierarchy.
It's interesting because he would and he wouldn't. Because on one level, like, he's really speaking a lot of truth to power, where he's, like, siding with the engines, even though no one wants him to, because all the trucks are a tightly knit group that all work for each other. But at the same time, Hector's way bigger than all the other trucks.
He's an absolute tank.
Yeah, so are they really going to stand up to him? I think most trucks would not dare stand up to Hector, but I think a few of them would realize he's a pushover. Like, I'm just gonna be very loose about this and just use Scruffy, assuming that he's evil at this time for some reason, and kind of out as a villain, because I think he's a lot more fun that way. But I imagine Scruffy would be one of the smarter trucks, and that's why he's been able to have this position of power. And I think that Scruffy would probably be able to put together that Hector's kind of a pushover. Like, most of the trucks would get so intimidated by his size and how much he can haul and that sort of stuff, they wouldn't...
They'd just back off. They wouldn't even engage.
Exactly. In a way, I'm sure Hector is already telling Thomas to keep away. I'm sure Hector, in a way, is probably also very socially awkward and doesn't really want to... I mean, he's had no exposure to other trucks. He spent his whole life in a white room being worked on and modified over and over again, and he's comfortable with engineering, you know, professionals. He's not comfortable with other trucks or engines or anything.
He's kind of like, he's like when you have someone that's been raised in isolation and then is finally put out in the real world.
Yeah.
Just the total guttural reaction of fear that he has in the beginning is really warranted.
Exactly. I don't think it's just about the fact that he hasn't been filled with coal. I think it's largely about the fact that he hasn't met other engines or rolling stock before either. And so it's really uncomfortable for him, and that's probably why he assaults Bill and Ben the way he does. But I would say
they're like holding him down. Like...
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you could tranquilize Hector, that would have been the way to do it.
I guess Thomas did with his buffers.
Yeah. I'll tranquilize him with my buffers. Thomas, no!
Hector had the worst luck by having Thomas be like the first engine he had a one-on-one like encounter with, because Thomas just solved the problem by assaulting him. Yeah.
Yeah, he really did. That was Thomas kind of... It's like that scene in Toy Story 2 where they're like, use your head, and then they cut to them charging forward with Rex. That's Thomas. It's like, if Edward were to tell him, use your head, Thomas would literally just headbutt whatever problem is in front of him. Like, that's kind of who he is. Yeah. That's his first gut response, is to just go all in. But the reason I bring up Hector's sheltered nature is because wouldn't it be such a good scene to have Scruffy, who, of course, wants to get Hector on his side, right? Like, Scruffy could just call Hector out in the middle of the yard and say, you know, Hector doesn't have any real power. I mean, after all, he is a pushover, right? I mean, if you actually talk to him for 5 seconds, then he's terrified of you. And, you know, he could say that in the middle of the yard if he really wanted to. Yeah. But it's working in Hector's favor that everyone's scared of him, because that means they all keep away from him, which is what he wants because he's socially awkward. So really, I think Scruffy would be smart about it and meet him in private and say, you know, it would be a real shame if everyone found out you aren't as tough as you look like you are. And Hector would start sweating, like, I'm sorry? I don't, well, you give off this image like you're big, tough Hector. The biggest coal truck in the British Isles, that's what they call you, huh?
The Horrid, huh? You think you're so horrid? Why are you always helping the engines, huh?
Well,
You're a scab, that's what you are.
I'm not! I just...
Alright, fine, then prove it. Derail a train.
Well, I would never. I couldn't even imagine the thought. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
I might. I would. God, this is going in a scary direction. Where Scruffy literally is, just to make Hector feel accepted, is convincing him to actually crash a train on purpose.
Yeah.
We don't think about how fragile Hector is really in the beginning here. He's he's so young. He's so impressionable. It's like Thomas won him over, sure, but that could easily be undone. Imagine when Hector meets the other trucks. Most of the trucks would be scared of him and say nothing to him, and Scruffy's like, fellas, you do not understand the opportunity we have here. We could convince Hector to work for us. For free. We just gotta push him over the edge. Once he hears what we have to say, he'll be crashing trains for us night and day. He could do what 90 trucks could in a year, in a day. We gotta get this guy on our side. It's like, I could just so see Scruffy warping his mind.
Yeah, and honestly, it's interesting that the trucks, because if you think about Hector as this big government project, if he is very successful, there's going to be more of him. He's going to be the status quo if
that's true.
He's successful. So I could see Scruffy trying to usurp and keep him down. Honestly, try and sabotage him before there are more Hectors everywhere.
Yeah, because honestly, wouldn't it be kind of great if Scruffy realizes, he brings up, like, if Hector succeeds, there's going to be a lot more of him around here. And all the trucks are like, oh dear. Well, then, if that happens, he'll replace all of us. And then Rickety starts going off about, like, oh, God, that would be terrible. Just imagine, there are hundreds of Hectors on the island and we all get scrapped. And while he says this, Scruffy just starts going, Don't make me laugh, Rickety. I'm sorry, can you imagine Fat Hat scrapping anything? Anything? Well, yeah, he scrapped lots of stuff. Okay, name one thing he scrapped. Come on. Well, let's see. There was, the
coffee pots!
All right, the coffee pots. Fine. Everyone always brings up the coffee pots. Yeah, the coffee pots got scrapped. But no trucks.
They scrapped my axle one time.
That was to help you, dumbass. But it's like, he would give this speech where he'd be like, you see what I mean? The Fat Controller doesn't scrap anything, so I'm not worried about being replaced. But he is going to bring in a few of these new Hectors if he gets the chance, and that would help us. But only if we make sure that we influence Hector right now. We want to influence the prototype, because he will influence everything that comes after him. Just imagine it, fellas. It'll be a beautiful new Britain. Hundreds of Hectors made to our design. And they're all kind of riling up while he's saying it. Like, yeah, he's right. Like, wouldn't that be scary? Scruffy basically influences the prototype in a way that there are innate things about Hector after the trial period that the engineers aren't aware of, that he's worn out his axles in certain ways, and he's convinced him to, like, develop certain biases or tilts towards certain directions. So it's like he's got a lot of problems he didn't have when he started. He's become more troublesome of a truck, but he'll still be successful. So now, like, these trucks would have been so much more successful and so much better for Britain. But instead, they play up a lot, their brakes jam, they do all the stuff troublesome trucks do. And the engineers are scratching their heads like, what the hell? He wasn't like this when he left our workshops. And it's Scruffy. Scruffy has manipulated Hector into becoming this worse version of himself. And that made him the pattern for hundreds more Hectors, just like him, that have those same flaws and are troublesome just like Scruffy wants. It would be a real masterstroke from him.
So then do you think more Hectors get built?
I would like to say so eventually, but I feel like it depends on when Hector is built. I feel like, why do I feel like Hector's, like, built in, like, the 70s or something?
I feel like that. I feel like 60s, 70s.
Like, I want him to be kind of modern. Like, also, it would explain why he's so afraid of coal, because, he's probably not seen any of it where he works. Because coal used to be everywhere on the railways, but by the 70s, Britain is still using coal, but not for the railways.
Not as much.
Yeah. It's also interesting that Hector's built to carry coal, so from the get-go, there is something about him that makes him at least more inclined to work with steam engines than diesel engines. But he's probably used to diesel engines, because who are the ones who are shuttling him around his plant? If this is the 70s, then it's probably diesel shunters moving him around wherever he's being built. And I'm imagining this huge facility with a lot of big white rooms where, like, a lot of different testing happens. And
lab coats and stuff.
Yeah, exactly, where they're all taking readings and stuff and that sort of thing. Like, this is a weird comparison that I never expected when we started this, but that really reminds me of Henry. Like, the fact that Henry was this experiment, and that was his whole big thing, and he was a failed experiment, whereas Hector won't be. But can you imagine how much they'd have in common to talk about? Like, Henry and Hector. At first, Henry would probably be scared of Hector, and Hector would be scared of Henry, but neither of them would show it. Hector would be like, keep away! And Henry would be like,
keep away, good sir.
I have to keep away. I have no motor. Oh, right. Like they're both very awkward. But they're not, like, they're really just scared of each other because Hector's huge and towers over even Henry. Like, I want Hector to even tower over, like, big tender engines. Like, he looks down on literally everyone on the island except for Cranky. Like, Hector is the tallest anything on the railway.
Damn, like taller than Murdoch, taller than...
Yeah,
Jeez.
Just, like, huge. Like, the biggest ever. And that's, like, that's his hallmark. That's what's shocking about it. And so Henry's scared of him at first, deep down. Because I think Henry would have... he would be scared of things, but he just wouldn't show it. Like, I like the idea that, say, Henry really is afraid of the rain, but, like, he never admits it. Like, that's kind of what I see Henry being. It's like, he's more dignified. He's not like in The Adventure Begins, where he's just running off terrified all the time. But He does have deep internal fears. It's just that he lies about them and hides them because he feels embarrassed about them. But deep down, he does have those fears.
And I think that if anyone is going to save Hector from falling into this peer pressure from the trucks, it would have to be the engines. Yeah, it would have to be Henry. Because how do we then get from Hector the Horrid to James Works It Out, where Hector is very comfortable, he's very helpful, he's giving advice. Like, he really comes into his own, I think, by that stage. I think we're looking at two different parts of Hector's life.
Where we very much are, and I could even see James Works It Out being, like, 10 years later. Like, if you wanted to kind of break them up in terms of when they take place, I could see that being much later, where Hector's, at this point, he's, like, greatly respected among the trucks. Maybe Scruffy has once again been pulled apart sometime in this 10 years and lost the whole battle and has not succeeded in making an army of super Hectors. But I think that story is probably a lot later in the grand scheme of things. Whereas Hector the Horrid is his first day. And I think the most interesting part of Hector's life is probably immediately after Hector the Horrid. What are those first few weeks like? Because he's, I think the episode that really should come right after Hector the Horrid is Hector meeting Scruffy, or Hector meeting the trucks in general, and he thinks that, okay, now that I'm not afraid of coal anymore, it's all hunky dory. There's no problem. But then there's all these new problems that arise from, the trucks approaching him and the other engines getting used to him. There's all these other things besides this fear of coal. And that's another thing with Henry and Hector. They both have a very specific fear. Henry's afraid of rain, and Hector is afraid of coal. Like, those are two
both things that come with their job description.
And it's interesting, because you can even get kind of I can imagine a conversation between the two of them, where Hector opens up to, like, Henry's maybe at the coaling plant overnight for some reason, and they're both awkwardly next to each other, and Henry's very nervous, and Hector looks very scary underneath the nighttime yard lights. His face is really creepy, and Henry's really nervous. But then they start to talk. Hector at some point admits, he takes a deep breath and just says, I used to be afraid of coal. And Henry looks over like, coal is what rescued me from the cutter's torch. I mean, if not for Welsh coal, I would be in dreadful disrepair. Oh, really? I see. I'm afraid of rain. Afraid of rain? I used to love the rain. It would wash off all the coal dust. I mean, that was that was a relief when the rain came.
Sometimes they'd fill me up with rainwater and go swimming in me.
They both laugh. And just like, it would be a really sweet moment. I could see something like that in the CGI series, in the Brenner era, where it's just like, that would be like a bonding moment. I could so see Hector would like start opening up about some of his more specific, like kind of mechanical things they're working on. It's like, the other trucks don't know this about me. But I just picture Hector with this kind of warbly, kind of a little bit nasally voice. Like at first you'd be like, "Keep away," and you're not really thinking about that part of his voice. But once he starts talking normally, he'll be like, "Hello, I'm Hector." It would be like a very. I see him as rather awkward. I don't think he's like. I think
a very stuffed up sounding voice.
Yeah. I think Henry would give him a lot of advice. Hector would start opening up to Henry about some of the more detailed mechanical problems he has that he doesn't really tell anyone else, that only the engineers know. I imagine there'd be a little work shed at the coaling plant with 3 engineers from the mainland that have been like the chief engineers on his construction. And wherever his workshop is, it's far away. It's like his plant is like a distance away. But these men are trialing Hector on Sodor, where there's probably more railway coal being shipped than anywhere else. That's probably the best place to do it. So they're trialing him on Sodor, and then they're going to give the Fat Controller the prototype, because he loves prototypes. They're basically in this little work shed that they eat and sleep in while they wait for the results on Hector to come in. So you've got his workmen kind of over in the shed at the coaling plant. And Hector kind of gestures over to that shed. He just kind of darts his eyes over there, and he's just like, only the experts know this right now, but I've got some squeaky axles. Something about my wheels oscillating at the wrong frequency. And Henry's like, "Oh, I've had that problem many times." "Really? I'm surprised. Some of the engineers don't even know what I'm talking about when I mention it." "Oh, no, I get it. I've been in the works for that 7, 8 times? Something like that." Really? Like, it would really... Hector would, like, start to feel understood by Henry. Because, like, Henry's really the only other engine that understands what it's like to be an experiment. Like, that's really his thing. That's his niche. Henry has advanced knowledge on all these kind of, mechanical concerns. Because, like, it's kind of like when you've got a human that's, like, just an expert on everything medical, even though they're not a doctor. They've just been in the hospital so many times that they've learned a lot about the human body and how it works. That's who Henry is. Like, he's got all this information in his head. And it really comes in clutch when he meets Hector. And Hector has all these questions about, the problems that he's facing. And it's even more surprising to Hector that, like, all these mechanical concerns can be solved by a steam engine. Because he's thinking, like, well, I'm a truck, I'm a hopper. It's not like he's going to understand. But really, Henry proves they're not all that different.
Well, and then Hector starts to... he starts to drift away from the trucks at that point. Like, yeah. I think that then he starts to become more of the engine's pet. And...
yeah, at least that's what Scruffy and the trucks would call him. They'd be like,
that's what they would think of him as a total traitor to their to their ideals and whatnot.
Yeah,
and I think that relative to when Toad Stands By happens, this would be interesting because think about how I could see the trucks in one breath thinking that Hector is the thing that'll finally do Oliver in, but then. By that point, he and Henry have gotten so acquainted, and Hector is so unthreatening to the engines that like they would try and say to Hector, like, hey, go get Oliver, you could finally do it for us.
I imagine that there would be like a scene where this would be interesting. Is like I'm imagining a scene where an engine is shunting in the yard, and Scruffy's there, right? And Scruffy is noticing that Hector is drifting away from them and his plan is failing, and he's really angry about it. And I'm imagining that, like, you've got, like, say, you've got maybe Percy shunts Scruffy forward. And you know how one truck bumps into the others?
Yeah.
I imagine it would be like Percy bumps Scruffy, and then Scruffy hits the next truck really hard, and the others just go flying. It's almost like Scruffy's translating all that rage and just going, "God damn it! Damn it!" And he's like bashing into his other compatriots, and they're just like, "Oh, Scruffy, you all right? You seem a little tense." And Scruffy's just like, "I am tense! My whole plan's falling apart. I can't believe this. It's like, he's just enraged, And it's like, it would be interesting because the trucks would have to talk about some of this stuff openly around certain engines. Probably only around engines who are either too afraid to tell the others about what they're planning, or who don't pay a lot of attention. Like, I imagine Percy's just humming to himself this whole time and doesn't realize what the trucks are talking about.
Right, yeah.
But it's like, Scruffy would get more desperate and be like, all right, we need to make a last stand. I say we gotta frighten Hector even more than we have before. And, maybe they just get more extreme with time.
What if they had the idea, like, what if we convince one of the engines to stick him to the back of the express, eh?
God, imagine that. All the trucks kind of start laughing, but a little nervously, like they're like, he's going a little too far with this.
You ever hear that when Hector's on your train, don't you hear a little squeak squeak, eh? I bet you if we put him at the back of the express, the axles will come right off.
All the other trucks are just like... But some of them are like, yeah, that's real good, Scruffy. But isn't that gonna make the express too heavy, and then it'll break away on Golden's Hill, and all those people might die? No, calm down. It's gonna be fine.
They're just coaches anyway.
God, that's such a dark line. He's not even thinking about the people inside. That doesn't even occur to him. He's just...
Yeah, I don't think he would.
God, that's how trucks think. That's so scary. Oh. Scruffy's like a genuine sociopath, I think. Like, he's not, he's all mayhem. But organized mayhem in a way, which is even worse. But that would be good. Imagine they did that, though. Imagine they put Hector on the back of the express. And
I could see something happening where Hector actually does something heroic.
Yeah.
Like, I could see, say Gordon's Hill or whatnot, and, the brake coach and, another coach break away because of Hector. But because of his axle problem, he actually manages to, jam them in the sleepers and stop the train at the bottom of the hill. So he becomes more beloved than ever before. Gordon lets him sleep in Tinmas sheds then.
Yeah. God, and that would be an epic scene. Imagine that the train literally breaks in the middle. There's 100 people in this section. They're in serious danger. The brake coach is it cannot... Maybe the guard went to talk to the station master, because hey, there's this coal truck on my train. So he went to talk to the station master. Gordon left without him, because Gordon was in a hurry. And then, there's no guard, so no one can break the train to a stop. Hector is the only chance the thing has. And then then somebody is coming up behind Hector. And maybe, I'm imagining it would be kind of maybe James and some trucks further back. And maybe for whatever reason, James is pushing the train, and Scruffy's at the front watching this happen. And he just, but he's thrilled. He's not even thinking about the personal damage to himself. He's just like, look at this, my master plan coming together. And he's hoping for a collision. He's like, he wants to take out James or something.
Come on, Hector, come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Come to Scruffy.
And then Hector shouts, and he snaps his axles in two, and he says, keep away! And he slowly just brakes to a halt, and just in time, James is like, oh my god! And he stops the train, and slams his brakes on, and the two stop side by side. By this point, when a truck is off the rails making that ballast crunching noise? That's Hector. Yeah. But this loudest, deepest noise he ever made, with all these grinding and railing noises, and he slowly slides to a halt, and he's not even on the rails anymore, and Scruffy, he stops right next to him. And maybe Hector's eye to eye with Scruffy, looking right down at him. And he's like, I see you listened. And Scruffy just looks up at him like, God damn it! God! And he literally busts his sides open and all the ballast spills out. And all the other trucks are all embarrassed for him. It's he's making a real display.
There's just total silence, and one of the trucks is like, Scruffy, shut up!
Yeah, exactly. It would be the most epic Hector moment ever. That would be amazing. If he was just that would be so great. That would be perfect.
Well, yeah, and then at that point, then Hector gets put on this pedestal. He's the one that saved a horrible collision. He's the one that saved the express.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the last story in his Railway series book that introduces him.
Yeah. So then when the dust settles and, Scruffy is sent away to the works, whatever, get his sides put back on. That night, I can imagine that Hector gets to sleep at Tidman's sheds with all the other engines. Gordon would bring him in, like, if he could have his arm around him and, like...
Exactly. He would, put his arm around him, he'd be like, now, these are Tidman's sheds, the grandest on the island of Sodor. And you, I'm giving you my berth tonight, Hector. It's like, he'd really just be... Like, Gordon would be mortified. Like, the express cut in the middle. He would be... Gordon's heart would stop the second that happened. He would feel... I think Gordon can feel... If you, like, uncoupled the brake coach and nothing else, Gordon would be able to feel it instantly. Feeling half the train fall off, he would be just, like, what do I do? Like, he does... Gordon, I imagine, usually runs through every single check to make sure that everything's hunky-dory. And it was. The only problem was that the station master ran off, so it wasn't really Gordon's fault. So... This would be really, like, terrifying to him. It's like, this can happen? In 80 years of me running on this railway, this has never happened to me before. Like, it would be
And if
like,
it wasn't for this crazy shenanigans with the trucks, I would have been done for.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, Gordon, maybe even in the beginning of the story, Gordon first sees Hector, and he tells Henry, he's like, why are you hanging out with that big, ridiculous truck, Henry? And Henry's just like, he's not ridiculous, Gordon. He's actually quite smart and kind, and you should respect him. I'll never respect a truck in my life. But then he does.
And then a month later, he's giving him a shrine in Tidman's sheds.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what happens to the Hector project after this?
That's interesting.
Does it get forgotten? Do more Hectors get built?
So firstly, I think they probably realize Hector's axle problem is a thing. But they also probably think about how this big, enormous, heavy truck managed to stop the express, and they think maybe we should just give him a really advanced braking system. Maybe that would be a good thing to give these trucks, because he was able to do it without brakes. If he had brakes, imagine.
He may have also caused the accident a little bit, too, with his weight.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe they think he's a little too heavy. Like, imagine because runaways could still happen if he wasn't on the express. They would be coal truck runaways, but they'd still be runaways. And so it's like, I think that they would probably maybe not make all the other ones quite as heavy. Like, I imagine that would be one of Hector's big characteristics, is he's very heavy. Any engine that starts pulling him starts out by going, oh, nearly there.
Well, I'd imagine that any Hectors following may even be smaller.
Yeah, that might be true. Hector and his army of little Hectors.
Yeah, don't talk to me or my sons ever again.
My God. I'm imagining it would maybe be like they're not as long. It's like they're still, like, think about like the baby warship, which is like kind of a smaller, cut down version of the warship with a different front. But it's something like that where you have, you can kind of see the similarities, but it's not like it's scaled down. It's just shortened. Like they don't use as much metal. And I think they'd probably have, like Hector has all these rivets on the side. When you compared him to Frankenstein earlier, I think that made sense. Because Hector looks like he was really bolted together, like with a lot of stuff going on the sides. And I think the later examples, accident or no, I think that they would look a lot cleaner. I think that the sides would be a lot smoother, like they'd have sheeting over that, so that they wouldn't really, and they'd probably have a few other things that are different, like maybe they would have all the kind of girdering on the front underneath the face, like normal hoppers usually
all those guardrails and stuff.
Yeah,
they'd be,
like you can very clearly see that Hector is a prototype, which is another reason that Gordon might like him. Like, Henry would like Hector because he's an experiment. I mean, he'd like him because he's a nice guy, but he'd relate to him because he's an experiment. And Gordon would relate to him because he's a prototype for a huge, successful class. Hector is the Gordon of coal trucks. So it actually makes sense that they'd get along so well. They'd have a lot in common. And it's weird. It's like, Hector might be the one reason Gordon would ever pull a coal train willingly. It's just because
if Gordon was given coal, he'd request Hector.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, Hector's my usual. I would like Hector, please. It's like, it's that sort of thing.
I'll have the Hector special.
Oh my god.
With extra coal.
With extra Hector. God. But yeah. That would be so charming to see how Hector wins over even the most unlikely engines and deals with Scruffy in a much more epic way than even Oliver did.
Well, and then I could see this boost of confidence come over him.
Yeah.
To the point that now where James works it out, where he, has this new advanced braking system. Now, a lot of the trucks look up to him now.
Yeah.
Like, some of the trucks that aren't fully indoctrinated by Scruffy begin to look at Hector as the way to go.
Yeah.
The ones that are cooperative.
Maybe, Hector starts this new movement, essentially, where trucks start to kind of, like maybe one of the engineers that was responsible for the Hector project stays behind on Sodor. The rest go back to the mainland and work on other projects and continue the Hector project in mass production. But maybe a few of them stay behind, and those guys are firstly Hector's made fitters, because Hector himself needs a lot of TLC. But also, it could be that, those guys stick around, and so Hector can tell them about the trucks on Sodor, and they can look into how to fix them. Because a lot of the trucks on Sodor, I mean, they the reason that they're so troublesome and their brakes slip on and off and all that stuff is just because they are not of high build quality. They're rusty. They've got, they squeak a lot. They've got a lot of problems that really don't benefit these trucks.
They've got disintegrating problems, too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, that'd be interesting, figuring out how to deal with the wood problem. Like, give them new wood, replace all the wood planking. Like, there's probably a lot of trucks. I imagine there's a lot of dread in the pit of the trucks where they're really just thinking, like, I'm not going to last forever. Like, my wood is rotting, and I hope no one's noticing, and I'm trying to ignore it, but, like...
It would be interesting if Hector starts campaigning for, like, some of the trucks to get metal sheeting.
Yeah, that would be... And maybe some of the trucks... And I'm imagining, like, the frames are the important part. Like, if you swap out the wood, that's okay, but if you have to keep the frames, or else it's not the same truck. So the trucks have more of a... they have more of a symbolic kind of emotional problem with changing from wood to metal, because they see that as modernizing. And they're all very proud that they are not metal trucks, because those are the new trucks, and they were not replaced. In the same way that steam engines are glad they're still here despite the diesels, the wooden trucks are very proud that they're still here despite the metal trucks. And so I think Hector would be the first to come along and say, guys, it's not that bad to be made of metal. And after all, you are who you are, even if you are made of metal. I mean, wood. I mean,
mineral wagons are made of metal. You could be more like them.
Imagine if Toby all of a sudden comes to the quarry one day and notices half the trucks are metal now, and he's just like, oh, what is this? Oh, look at all this ghastly metal. And Henrietta's like, I quite like it. And Toby's like, oh, do you now?
Oh, that'll never happen to us.
Yeah. But then 20, 30 years down the line,
they get metal sheeted.
Yeah, like, Toby has a lot of wood rot, and eventually the Fat Controller's like, Toby, you're not gonna like this, but, I think Hector was right. Good God. And then right when he says that, a wood plank falls off and onto the ground. It's like he really needs a new casing around him. And Toby can get away with it for longer because he doesn't actually carry anything. His casing is basically pointless. It just provides shelter, so that's the only thing it does, but it just needs to hold itself up under its own weight. Whereas the wooden trucks would need kind of immediate intervention. I could even see it where maybe the trucks aren't treated with respect on Sodor. I mean, they're not, but like, literally, maybe the Fat Controller does scrap trucks. But then Hector comes along and finally figures out how to convey what the trucks believe.
Yeah.
It's like he talks to the Fat Controller, and he tells him, these are not just props in the story of steam engines, sir. These are...
That's the thing. I feel like the trucks are like one of the few things that are not really treated with much sentimentality. And that's why there's a lot of resentment, and that's why they act out with all these accidents.
Yeah, no, exactly. And also, I think it's just the fact that, they're gonna behave that way if you don't maintain them properly. It's a vicious cycle. You're not giving them the care that they deserve, so they're going to behave like trucks that haven't been cared for. And if you just come along and actually give them that care. I think at first a lot of the trucks would resent Hector because they would think like, wow, he gets all this time poured into him. He gets a whole team of engineers figuring out if his wheels squeak. No one cares if my wheels squeak.
Everyone asks, where's the troublesome truck, and not how's the troublesome truck.
Yeah, exactly. I think that Hector really makes a difference when he comes to Sodor. Scruffy used to be the only figurehead for what a truck can be. It's always an evil figurehead. It's always someone who's power-hungry or troublesome.
Yeah, and Scruffy's mentality is let yourself go to rot. Like, embrace demise, embrace chaos, embrace crashes.
Scruffy is very unhealthy. And I feel like after he's rebuilt after the Oliver incident, he might try to get unhealthy again. Like, he doesn't like being rebuilt. Look at him at the end of Toad Stands By in the show.
He's pissed.
Yeah, he's just like, he can't say anything, because if he does, it makes one wrong step, things are going to go south for him. I imagine at some point he organizes some sort of transfer, has his Scruffy labeling painted off, and then he can work somewhere else and start new trouble. Which is probably how he gets to the coaling plant. He's probably a coal truck by some point. But, I imagine even if Scruffy doesn't hold the name anymore, he's still Scruffy, and he may look like all the other trucks, but he's not one of the other trucks. There's something crazy about this one.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We haven't talked about Hector and Thomas all that much. And I think...
I think it's because it's just bad fortune that Thomas, being who he is, came to blows with Hector.
Yeah.
Like, Thomas doesn't know how to treat people that are clearly having a problem.
Yeah.
Clearly suffering.
That's interesting. He doesn't
If
really.
they're confrontational, at least. Thomas only cares about the confrontation part.
I feel like Thomas is the type of person that if someone comes to him with an issue, he's not quite sure what to say. It's like, it depends. He doesn't deal with emotional problems well. If Thomas, like say when Thomas finds out Hero is in the depths of a forest and needs to be rebuilt or he'll be scrapped, Thomas is like, okay, I know what to do. I'll deal with it immediately.
Just bring you parts and fuck Spencer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but with a lot of other situations, Thomas is at a loss. Thomas doesn't really know... Like, I imagine there'd be situations where Percy comes home to Farquhar Sheds and he'd just be like, Thomas, I need to talk about my feelings. And Thomas is like, all right. Like, it's like Thomas is reading the paper at the time and then he looks up and he's like, what? Okay, I guess. Like, he'd want to help, right? But he would not say the right thing.
Yeah.
Percy would be like, Diesel was really mean to me today, and well, just tell him to screw off. That's not really what I needed to hear, Thomas. Well, that's what I would do. I'd just tell him to screw off. Maybe, like, pull some sort of prank on him. I don't really need solutions, Thomas. I just need, I don't know, support. Am I really as silly as he says? I mean, sometimes. Thomas,
yeah.
Like, he wouldn't say the right thing, right?
And then when Hector is just shouting at him and causes Rosie to run away screaming, Thomas is just like, all right, he rolls up his sleeves, come here, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I really think that like Thomas is kind of doing that for Rosie. But really what Rosie needs is for someone to chase after her and tell her everything's okay. Not for Thomas to assault Hector. That's not the way to deal with the problem. But Thomas feels like it is, because that's how Thomas deals with problems. Head first, just dives into it, without thinking. That's his mentality. And sometimes that works. Some of the best things he ever did, he did because he dived in without thinking. But also some of the worst moments are because Thomas isn't thinking about other people's feelings. And this is one of them.
And honestly, if Hector, had any other engine, I think that it would have gone differently. Yeah. Like, if that were Henry or Edward, we all know that scene would have gone differently. Like, it would not have come to blows.
It would literally, if it was Edward, Hector would be like, keep away! And Edward would just be like, this is about the code, isn't it? Yes. Like, it'd be over. Yeah. It'd be over in like 5 seconds. Like,
it does speak to Hector's strength of character that as soon as he does get knocked over and whatnot, he has the sensibility to be forthcoming with his feelings.
Yeah, that's true. Like, Hector is just dying to explain his emotional struggles. But he needs to kind of be...
He needs to be taken down a notch. Like, he just needs to be brought back down to earth. It is very interesting how we have this whole arc built for Hector. I really like with what we came up with.
Yeah, no, I really do. I love the idea of him just being this huge project that like has all these different scientists involved, and then they're observing him actively at the coaling plant, and they have their own little shed, and all this stuff going on. And this, like, Hector just has so much that allows him to relate to other characters. He's a prototype like Gordon. He's an experiment like Henry. He's just got so much going for him, and he's a good link between someone like Henry and Gordon are two of the engines who trucks would hate the most and who disrespect trucks the most. And so the fact that Hector can relate to them and then and also relate to the trucks, he's such a great middleman.
Well, not only is he a link between, truck and engine, he's a link, he becomes a force for good. That, like, in the end, he actually makes truck-engine interactions a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe with all that he's learned and all the ways that he has developed, I'm imagining his emotional development kind of parallels his mechanical development as the men are making slight adjustments and making sure that he's up to date so he can be mass produced. Yeah. All of that learning, all of that growing Hector has done throughout his process on Sodor is then transferred to all the trucks that come after him. They all have these tendencies. And it's the opposite of what S.C.R.Ruffey would have wanted. You've got hundreds of Hectors all across Britain that all are making the railways a better place for all the engines and rolling stock involved and making everything better. Now, I love this whole arc, though. I do really... it feels very right for Hector, because I really see Hector as being someone who is big and scary and powerful when you first see him. But then, when you look underneath the surface, he's really a very compassionate, caring guy who is very sensitive and has a lot of insecurities, but knows how to work through them and is honest about them. Like, he admits it pretty early on. It's like the end of his first episode, he admits it. So really, when you think about it, I think Hector's good at working through his emotional problems. And I think it helps that he's surrounded by engines that he wins over who can help him to kind of work through all these things, and eventually creates this support network of trucks, too, who all look up to him and finally realize that S.C.R.Ruffey's been leading them astray all these years.
This is an overall great summation of Hector's character, and I really, really enjoy everything that we came up with, for sure.
Yeah, me too. It's been a blast coming up with all of it. And I'd love to hear what the audience thinks as well. I mean, what do you guys think about Hector? What do you think about his, do you think he's British or American? Do you think, like, he's this big government project? Or do you think he's, like, there's a lot of him or a few of him? Or do you think he's, like, what the wiki says he is? Or, like, what do you think? There's a lot of different ways to tackle this.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm HiroTheJapaneseTrain, a.k.a. Matt.
And I'm MasterOfTheLemons, a.k.a. Lemmy.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one, everyone.